Rockaways Productions presents The Casey Waters Show, episode 119, In the Beginning. Hello, I'm your host, Casey Waters. Today, I will continue with early autism, conformity, and the Great Independent from episode 118. Then I will begin with In the Beginning. So now let's continue with early autism, conformity, and the Great Independent. Well, then I had to think about conformity. This is a very important period for me. So, during this time period, around second and third grade, especially let's say late in second grade, in the beginning of third grade, on my recess time, whenever I had time to think, well, if I wasn't after caterpillars or bees, I would hang out and think about philosophy and society and conformity. And I would think about it. I would watch my classmates, how they get caught up in silly trends, in silly activities, how they're all doing the same thing. And it's like constantly chasing a carrot as they follow trend to trend, fashion to fashion. I could see all this at a very young age, and I could see how it would lead to disillusionment, as you never could catch up to the trend, and often you would fall short, somehow not being good enough, somehow being too critical of yourself. Somehow you would feel you wouldn't even have an identity, for you would feel so lost in moving from trend to trend. And when you move, or change schools, or change friends, it might be upsetting to you, as you would have to almost reprogram yourself to a new set of standards, a new set of thinking, new morals too. Gee, this would be upsetting and cause disillusionment. And yes, I thought about this all at the remarkable age of only 8 or 9, and thought about it extensively. So now, at the age of 47, I still remember this. Sure, I see it as a critical time in my development. You betcha. So the question, to conform or not conform. I chose not to conform, or to only conform just enough so I could, quote, get by with learning and basic activities. But I realized that my moral judgment, my sense of fashion, my sense of hobbies, and my sense of friends and related activities should all be dictated by me. Sure, what's good enough for me is good enough for me. I shouldn't have to have my friends or others dictate what I do, even though I'm sure they influenced me. Of course they did, just like they do everybody. However, the influence was probably somewhat more limited, perhaps only half as strong as with most people. I was able to fend off a lot of it with my own sense of autism, my own sense of independence. Of course, independent thinking can get you into trouble. Obviously, you have to be careful what your standards are and what you want to do. You have to judge yourself in relation to everybody else, even being an independent autistic person. Sure you should, at least in theory. You don't want to do anything too wild or crazy or detrimental. But anyway, so assuming that you could go on with your activity, assuming it's relatively benign, perhaps a lot of times it would be useful. Perhaps you, as an autistic person, can invent something great, come up with some great new philosophy or other activities. If you are interested in collaborating with me or presenting your material on my show, please email me at caseywaters2@caseywaters.com. You can mail in a tape if you like. Sure, why not? So there's other things going on too. For this idea of nonconformity leads to the notion of the Great Independent, as covered in the distant past on The Casey Waters Show, circa 1994 or early 1995. Gee, that was a long time ago, I know. So I could cover it again. Sure. The Great Independent. Well, that's, I guess, who I am, and probably many other people, sure, who hold their sense of independence from society and aren't swept away readily by changing morals or changing fashion or changing hobbies or changing political aspirations or what's politically correct or politically incorrect or the ways to do things, what is safe and what is not safe. What was safe circa 1970 is probably unsafe circa 2008. I'm referring to activities for youngsters, such as diving off a high diving board. You don't see so many of them now do you, as you did in the distant past? Some ways I think it is a pity. Anyway, I guess it goes along with the notion of individual responsibility and the individual assuming risk for their own injury and not suing the operator or the owner. Anyway, things change, I know. But anyway, of course, being independent, you could go off and become too eccentric, and that could be a problem. You could become isolated too much from society and miss out on important viewpoints. This could misguide you, so be aware of it. You do want to be mainstream somewhat as the Great Independent, and you do want to have a variety of friends with a variety of interests, with a variety of morals, and then you can judge amongst them, and you could exist amongst them comfortably, even though they might be somewhat different. You have to allow for all this, for conditions change, and you have to be ready to adapt when they do. This is important, you betcha. Well, I hope you have enjoyed this section of The Casey Waters Show.